At my engagement party, my mother raised her glass, smiled at the 50 guests, and said, "I just want everyone to know how hard I've worked to help my daughter get to this happy day. Some mothers just give everything." People applauded. My fiancé stood up next, said I'd like to add something, and set his phone on the table. "This is a voicemail my mother-in-law left my ex-girlfriend last month," he said. "I think everyone should hear how hard she's been working." My mother's smile did not survive the first 10 seconds. "Let me back up. My name is Delphine Marchetti. I'm 38 years old, and it took me until I was 37 to understand that the person who had quietly wrecked every good thing in my life for 20 years was not bad luck, and was not my own inadequacy, and was not fate. It was my mother. And she did it the whole time, while telling me, and everyone else, that no one loved me more than she did. This is the hardest kind of betrayal to see, because it wears the face of the one person you're taught to trust above all others. You don't check the hand of your own mother for a knife. You spend 20 years assuming the wounds are your own fault. Let me tell you about my mother, Genevieve. To the outside world, my mother was devoted, involved. A mother who showed up, who was always there, who sacrificed. If you'd asked anyone who knew us, they'd have told you Genevieve lived for her daughter. And that was true, in a way more sinister than any of them understood. She didn't live for me. She lived through me, and against me, both at once, because somewhere in my mother was a wound so deep that she could not bear for her daughter to have the things she felt life had denied her. My mother had been, when she was young, beautiful and ambitious, and certain she was destined for a bigger life than she got. She'd wanted to be a performer. She'd married young, been disappointed, and settled into a life that never matched the one she'd imagined. And when she had me, a daughter, a girl who might get the life she didn't, something curdled. She loved me. I truly believe that. She could not stand to watch me succeed where she'd failed. And so, for 20 years, every time I got close to something good, my mother found a way to take it from me, always invisibly, always framed as help. Let me show you the pattern, because the pattern is the whole story, and I couldn't see it for 2 decades because each piece looked like isolated misfortune. When I was 17, I was cast as the lead in the school play. It was a big deal. I loved theater, I was good at it, and it was mine. 3 days before opening, I came down with a violent stomach illness and couldn't perform. My understudy went on. I was devastated, and my mother was so comforting, so present, making me tea, telling me there'd be other chances. I found out 20 years later that my mother had put something in my food. She admitted it eventually, framed as protecting me. "You were getting too caught up in that world. It wasn't good for you. I could see it taking you somewhere I couldn't follow." When I was 22 and got into a graduate program across the country, a prestigious one, a real launch, the acceptance was mysteriously lost, and by the time it was sorted out, the spot was gone. My mother was there to console me and suggest I stay close to home where she could help me. I found out later she'd intercepted the mail, for weeks, to run out the clock. When I was 28 and in a serious relationship with a good man who wanted to marry me, it fell apart over a series of misunderstandings that felt, at the time, like the ordinary friction of a relationship dying. He'd heard things about me. I'd heard things about him. He drifted, then broke, both of us confused. My mother held me while I cried and told me he was never good enough anyway. I know now that she was the source of the things each of us heard, that she'd fed him doubts about me and me doubts about him, patiently, until the thing collapsed. Do you see it? Every good thing. The play, the program, the man. 20 years of my life, and at every peak, just before I could plant a flag, the ground gave way, and my mother was always right there to catch me as I fell, to comfort me, to be the one person who never abandoned me. She wasn't catching me. She was the one who'd cut the rope, but she made sure to be standing where I'd land so that I'd associate her with love instead of loss. And it worked. God, it worked. By my mid-30s, I was a woman who believed deep down she wasn't meant for good things, that every time I reached, life snatched it back, and that the only reliable love in the world was my mother's, because she was the only one who was always there when everything fell apart. I'd been trained over 20 years to fail and to run to her. She'd made herself the cure for a disease she was secretly spreading. Here is what finally broke the spell. His name is Theo. I met him at 36, and I fell in love the way you do when you stopped expecting to, and he loved me back plainly and without games. And my mother, right on schedule, went to work. Theo was different in one crucial way from everyone who came before. He'd grown up with a manipulative parent himself, and he recognized the shape of it. When my mother began doing to us what she'd done to me my whole life, the little poisonous comments, the concerns, the manufactured friction, Theo didn't get confused and drift. He got suspicious. And instead of pulling away from me, he pulled toward me and started paying attention to her. And then my mother made the mistake that ended 20 years. She called Theo's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Kara, whom Theo had dated years earlier and remained on friendly terms with, my mother. Trying to blow up our relationship, the way she'd blown up the one when I was 28, called Kara and tried to recruit her, tried to get Kara to reach out to Theo to stir up the past, to plant the seed of doubt that had worked so many times on me. She left a voicemail laying out, in her own voice, what she wanted Kara to do and why, and how to make it look natural. She had no idea Kara and Theo were still friends. Kara listened to the voicemail, appalled, and called Theo immediately and forwarded it to him. And Theo sat me down and played it for me, and I heard my mother's voice, the voice that had comforted me through every loss she'd secretly caused, calmly plotting to destroy the best thing in my life. I want to describe what that was like because it wasn't only pain. It was the sudden, total reorganization of 20 years. Sitting there, listening to my mother scheme in her own words, I felt every collapsed dream of my life snap into a new shape. The play, the program. Man at 28, it had never been me. It had never been bad luck. It had been her the whole time, and I had spent 2 decades running into the arms of the person who'd engineered my every fall. Once I knew what to look for, the rest came apart fast. Theo and I began quietly to compare notes and gather what we could. I went back through my life, and now that I could see it, the pattern was everywhere. And when I finally confronted my mother carefully with Theo present, she did the thing that removed my last doubt. She admitted it, not with shame, with justification. Everything I did out of love. That world would have taken you from me. That school would have taken you. These men would have taken you. I kept you safe. I kept you close. A mother's job is to protect her child. She had reframed 20 years of sabotage as devotion so completely that she believed it. She could not distinguish between loving me and possessing me. The voicemail was the proof. But the confession was the thing that freed me because it told me the truth I'd been avoiding. She was never going to change because she didn't believe she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, cutting the rope and catching me was the purest love there was. Now, the engagement party. We'd already planned it before the voicemail surfaced. And after everything came out, Theo and I talked for a long time about what to do, and we made a decision together that I don't regret. My mother had spent 20 years operating in the dark, in private, where her sabotage could always be reframed as coincidence, and her comfort could always be reframed as love. She had never once been made to answer for any of it in the light. And I decided that if this was going to be the end, and it was going to be the end, it would happen where she'd never allowed it, in public with witnesses on the record. So we let the party proceed, 50 guests. And my mother, who still didn't know we had the voicemail, who still believed she'd successfully begun poisoning the relationship, stood up to make a toast. And she said the thing about how hard she'd worked to help her daughter reach this happy day, how some mothers just give everything, and the guests applauded her devotion. And Theo stood up and said, "I'd like to add something," and set his phone on the table. "This is a voicemail my mother-in-law left my ex-girlfriend last month," he said, into a room that had no idea what was coming. "I think everyone should hear how hard she's been working." And he played it. My mother's voice, calm and scheming, filled the room, laying out her plan to recruit Theo's ex to destroy our relationship, explaining how to make it look natural, in the same warm tone she'd used to comfort me through every loss of my life. Few people listened to a mother plot the sabotage of her own daughter's happiness. And then Theo, quietly, said the thing that recontextualized all of it. This isn't the first time. Delphine's school play at 17, her graduate program at 22, a man who wanted to marry her at 28. Every good thing in her life for 20 years that mysteriously fell apart just before it happened, while her mother was always right there to comfort her. It was never bad luck. It was always this voice doing this in the dark. She just never got caught before. The room was silent. My mother's face had gone through fury and something cornered, and finally, into the dawning, understanding that the private darkness she'd operated in for 20 years had just been switched to daylight in front of everyone whose good opinion she lived for. Here is how it ended, and it ended in the bittersweet register, because some betrayals don't resolve in a courtroom or a clean victory. They resolve in a door closing. There was no crime to prosecute. Really, the poisoned food was 2 decades gone. The sabotage was mostly the kind that leaves no legal trace. What there was the truth, finally spoken in the light, and a choice. I chose to end my relationship with my mother, fully. It is the hardest thing I have ever done, and I want to be honest that it did not feel triumphant in the moment. It felt like grief, like a death, because in a way it was one. I was not just leaving my mother. I was leaving the only source of love I'd been trained to rely on, and grieving the mother I'd believed in for 37 years, who, it turned out, had never existed. The woman who caught me every time I fell was the woman who pushed me. You cannot keep someone like that in your life, not because you hate them, but because staying means agreeing to keep falling. My mother did what people like her do. She rallied a few relatives to her story, that I was ungrateful, that I'd been poisoned against her, that after everything she'd sacrificed. But the voicemail had been played for 50 people, and a scheme in her own voice is hard to spin, and most of the family, once they understood the pattern, quietly stepped back from her. She has spent the years since as the wronged mother of an ungrateful daughter, a role she performs to anyone who will listen, and I've stopped needing them to disbelieve her. I know what's true. Theo knows. That's enough. Because here's the thing that turned the grief, over time, into something like triumph. Once my mother was gone from my life, the sabotage stopped, obviously, and for the first time, I got to find out who I was without someone cutting the rope. I married Theo. I went back to school at 38 for the program I'd lost at 22, and I finished it, and no acceptance got mysteriously lost, because the person who lost them was no longer in my life. I did community theater, and I performed, and nobody put anything in my food. One by one, I got back the good things my mother had taken, not the exact ones, those were gone, but their shape, and I discovered that I had never been a woman who wasn't meant for good things. I'd just been a woman with someone standing behind her, pulling them away, and calling it love. My mother stood up at my engagement party and told 50 people how hard she'd worked to help her daughter reach that happy day. It was the only true thing she said. She had worked incredibly hard for 20 years at my life, just not for it. She spent 2 decades convincing me the world kept taking things from me so that she'd always be the one thing I had left. The day I finally understood that was the day the world stopped taking things from me, because she was the world, and I finally let her go.